Have you ever heard of the Victorian fasting girls? A fasting girl is one of a number of young women, usually in their early teens from the Victorian era, who claim to be able to survive for long periods of time, sometimes years, without food. In addition to refusing to eat food, many fasting girls claim to have magical or religious powers. Some of these fasting girls also displayed signs of stigmata, which are bodily wounds or scars which appear in locations that correspond to the crucifixion wounds of Jesus Christ. People in the 19th century were fascinated by these fasting girls, and they were often written about in newspapers. But most doctors ascribe this phenomenon to fraud and hysteria among the girls. Historian Joan Jacobs Brumberg believes that the fasting girl phenomenon is an early example of anorexia nervosa. Two of the most famous fasting girls were Molly Fletcher and Sarah Jacob. Molly Fletcher was known as the Brooklyn Enigma and was famous for her claim of not eating or eating very little for extended periods of time. Around the age of 19, reports came out that she had gone for a full 7 weeks without eating. She also claimed that she had powers that included being able to predict future events, as well as the ability to read without sight. By the late 1870s, her claim of abstinence from food lasted for 14 years. Doctors and people in the public began to question her abilities and wanted to perform tests to determine if her claims were true. Her claims were never verified, and she died in February 1916. But an even crazier case that led to death and arrests was that of Sarah Jacob. Sarah Jacob was known as the Welsh fasting girl and claimed to not have eaten any food at all after the age of 10. Sarah Jacob was supported by a vicar who was convinced that her claim was authentic, and Sarah enjoyed a long period of publicity, and she even received many gifts and donations from people who believed that she was miraculous. But doctors were becoming increasingly skeptical about her claims, and eventually it was proposed that she be monitored in a hospital environment to see whether her claims about fasting were true. In 1869, her parents agreed for a test to be conducted under the strict supervision of nurses. The nurses were instructed not to deny Jacob any food if she requested food, but to see that any food she received was monitored and recorded. After 2 weeks, she was showing clear signs of starvation. The vicar told the parents that Sarah was failing and that the supervision should stop so that she could be fed. But her parents refused, and they even continued to refuse even after they were told that their daughter was dying. They insisted that they had frequently seen her like this and that the lack of food had nothing to do with her symptoms. Sarah Jacob died of starvation a few days later, and it was found that she had actually been eating small amounts of food secretly, which she could no longer do while she was being supervised. Her parents were convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to hard labor. What do you think of these Victorian fasting girls? Do they have magical powers, or were they just frauds?